Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're looking at that classic political milestone, the first 100 days.
Right, the 100-day report card.
Exactly. Now, you could argue maybe it's not quite the powerhouse measure it was back in, say, FDR's time.
Yeah, the context is definitely different today. The pace is faster, maybe.
For sure. But it still gives us a useful, well, snapshot, doesn't it? An early look at an administration's direction.
Absolutely. It's that initial burst, where they set priorities, make appointments, start showing their hand.
And that's exactly what we're diving into. We've gathered a bunch of news analyses, all dated April 30th, 2025.
Marking that 100-day point for the new Trump administration.
Right. We've got pieces from the New York Times, the AP, Politico, U.S. News and World Report, CNN. Quite a range.
A good cross-section.
What really jumped out was just the sheer amount of ink spilled, the volume of analysis around this 100-day mark.
It really does show how much weight we still put on these first few months. Kind of a benchmark, intended or not.
Okay, let's dig in. Starting with the economy. It's worth remembering economic anxieties, cost of living, trade, especially China, were huge factors leading up to the election.
Definitely front and center for many voters.
So, based on these reports covering the first 100 days, what's the verdict on the economic impact?
Well, interestingly, the consensus in these pieces seems to be minimal impact on the economy so far. That's the phrase used.
Minimal so far, okay.
Yeah.
But were there specific actions taken?
Oh, yes. A big one was the immediate implementation of that promised tariff on Chinese goods, 145% tariff.
145%? Wow, that's aggressive.
Certainly signals a major shift. Protectionist, definitely.
Yeah.
And something that could, really ripple through supply chains, possibly trigger retaliation, too.
How did Wall Street take that news, the financial markets?
Well, the initial reaction reported was negative. The S&P 500 dipped. Markets got a bit spooked, seems like.
Indicating uncertainty.
Yeah, uncertainty about the fallout from the tariff, other policies. Now, the reports do say the market clawed back some ground, but it was still apparently below where it started the year.
Okay. And the administration's response to that market, nervousness.
The reporting indicates a tendency to blame external forces, foreign countries, specifically for the economic situation.
Familiar framing.
And there's also a specific mention, quite pointedly, of Jeff Bezos. He's quoted essentially blaming the administration's policies for recent price hikes, saying it's Trump's fault, not his.
Interesting clash there. Okay, let's shift gears to immigration, another huge campaign theme, the promise of mass deportations.
Right. The 11 million figure was frequently cited.
So what do the sources say is happening on the ground 100 days in?
The data cited actually shows a decrease in border crossings during this period.
Decrease compared to?
Compared to the same period, or the preceding period, under President Biden.
Okay, so fewer people crossing. Does that mean the deterrence policies are working as intended?
Well, that's the complex part. The analysis suggests it's not necessarily straightforward.
How so?
A deterrent effect is possible, yes, but it could also be that stricter policies are simply leading to fewer attempts to cross. They might be seeing it as futile, perhaps.
Ah, okay. So the reason for the decrease is debatable.
Exactly. And the reports also emphasize that a lot of the enforcement focus seems to be shifting inward, deporting people already living in the U.S., rather than solely focusing on the border itself.
Got it. Now, the next theme is described pretty starkly in our notes as gutting the government. That's strong language. What's behind that description in the sources?
It is strong. One key action highlighted is appointing Elon Musk.
Right, I remember reading about that.
He's described as a kind of czar, tasked specifically with cutting bureaucracies, streamlining things.
And has that had results, according to these reports?
Apparently, yes. The reports mention significant savings and efficiency improvements attributed to his efforts already.
But gutting implies more than just efficiency, right?
Right. The broader context presented is an ambition to fundamentally shrink the federal government through pretty deep budget and staff cuts.
Across the board? Or targeted?
It seems targeted in many ways. The reports list specifics. Dismantling USAID, the foreign aid agency.
Okay.
Firing around 10,000 federal employees overall. Laying off 1,200 NIH researchers.
Wow, NIH.
Thousands cut from the Department of Defense, too, with some sources apparently raising concerns about weakening national security because of that. Slashing IRS workforce numbers, another 8,000 federal workers laid off elsewhere. Cuts to government assistance programs affecting, they say, hundreds of thousands of people.
That's a lot of cuts in a short time.
It's presented as a very deliberate, widespread effort to streamline, yes, but also to dismantle parts of the government the administration dislikes or sees as uh, wasteful.
A fundamental reshaping, it sounds like.
That seems to be the picture painted by these sources, yeah.
Yeah.
A redefinition of the government's role.
Okay, let's move to another area flagged as particularly complex and significant, the rule of law.
Yes, this is a major focus in the analysis we reviewed.
What are the key points being raised?
Well, there's a really striking quote attributed to President Trump himself.
Oh.
It reads, "Nobody has ever done what I've done. I have broken every law and then fixed it, and nobody has complained."
He actually said that.
According to the source, yes. Though the article does quickly add a clarification, suggesting he likely meant something different, perhaps bending rules rather than literally breaking laws.
Still, quite a statement.
Indeed. But beyond the rhetoric, the reports detail specific actions raising concerns.
Such as?
Numerous pardons, that's one area, including, reportedly, for individuals involved in the January 6th Capitol riot.
Pardons for January 6th rioters.
Yes, and the reports specify even some who were convicted of injuring police officers during the riot.
That's highly controversial, surely.
Extremely. Then there are allegations, and these are serious, that the Justice Department is being directed to investigate political opponents.
Directed by the White House.
That's the allegation reported. And also targeting judges, including specific mentions of the Supreme Court, if they make rulings the administration dislikes.
Targeting judges, that raises huge separation of powers questions.
Absolutely. And there's more under this rule of law heading.
Go on.
Sources claim orders have been given to deport people, not for committing crimes, but for speaking out against administration policies.
Deporting people for political speech.
That's the claim reported. And maybe even more alarmingly, an assertion that he ordered arrests of people who don't pledge allegiance to him personally, and also those who support birthright citizenship.
Arrests. That sounds unconstitutional on its face. 14th Amendment issues right there.
Big constitutional questions are definitely being raised by these reports. Finally, there's a claim that the country's 10 biggest law firms have been put on retainer.
For what purpose?
The stated purpose, according to the sources, pursuing political adversaries.
Using top law firms against opponents. If true, these reports paint a picture of the legal system being used in unprecedented ways.
A significant departure from traditional norms is how it's characterized, yes.
Right. Okay, let's talk about the use of executive orders. That often comes up early in presidencies.
It does, but the scale here seems different. The reporting suggests the number of EOs signed in these 100 days is, well, huge.
How huge?
More than the total signed by all presidents in the past 100 years combined.
Wait, combined? That can't be right.
That's the statistic presented in one of the analyses. It's an astonishing claim, needs verification, but that's what's reported.
Assuming it's even close to accurate, why so many? What's the strategy?
The analysis points to it being a tactic to bypass Congress, to enact policy directly, without needing legislative approval.
A power grab, essentially.
That's one interpretation. What's also noted as interesting is the apparent support for this approach from within the Republican Party.
Despite historically opposing overuse of executive orders.
Precisely. The irony is highlighted in the reporting.
The briefing also mentions a theme of retribution. What does that refer to?
It refers to reports of actions taken against people or groups seen as critics or disloyal.
Like who?
Republican leaders who've criticized the president, for example.
Right.
Specific media outlets, even cutting federal funding to colleges and universities perceived as critical.
So using the power of the office to settle scores, essentially.
That's the pattern the sources seem to be describing.
All right, let's turn to the world stage. Foreign policy. How's the approach characterized in these first 100 days?
Transactional and unpredictable are words that come up a lot in the analyses. Meaning deals seem prioritized over long-term alliances, and allies aren't quite sure what to expect. Foreign trips apparently had limited diplomatic impact.
And the overarching principle.
American interests first, stated very clearly,
Yeah.
but often interpreted, the sources suggest, in a kind of zero-sum way.
What does that look like in practice?
Reports mention cuts to foreign aid, a withdrawal from cooperation on global issues, climate change, pandemics, that sort of thing.
And relationships with other countries.
Traditional allies, described as strained. Meanwhile, perhaps warming ties with some authoritarian leaders. The worldview seems to prioritize personal leader-to-leader deals over, established diplomatic structures.
Any specific doctrines being revived?
Yes, the Monroe Doctrine is mentioned. That old U.S. policy basically asserting dominance in the Western Hemisphere.
Reviving the Monroe Doctrine, what could that mean for, say, Canada? Or the Panama Canal.
Exactly. Big implications for the region. The reports even mention Greenland in that context, potentially. It signals a very different view of regional relationships.
Okay, how is all this playing out with the American public? What do the polls say after 100 days?
Well, approval ratings reportedly started near historic lows. They've ticked up slightly, according to the poll site.
A slight increase. But any other key findings?
Yes, a pretty stark one.
Yeah,
A majority of Americans surveyed apparently consider the president a dangerous dictator.
a majority. Wow.
That's the poll finding reported. It's crucial to add, though, that this view isn't uniform. Republicans and white individuals polled generally see it differently.
Important context. Now, let's talk campaign promises versus reality. Always a key check. What promises do the sources say have been kept in these 100 days?
Okay, the list provided includes enacting those tariffs we discussed,
Right.
ending federal funding for gender transition services,
Mm.
instructing agencies to stop promoting gender transition,
Okay.
firing generals described as woke, signing an executive order related to birthright citizenship, though the legality might be challenged,
Got it.
increasing funding for military deportations, terminating some programs from the Inflation Reduction Act, and repealing certain AI-related rights established previously.
So, a fair number of specific actions aligning with promises. What about promises that are still pending or haven't happened yet?
Still on the to-do list, according to these reports, disclosing the presidential transition planning documents, implementing mass deportations on day one that obviously didn't happen at that scale. A strange one about making prisons self-sorting.
Self-sorting prisons.
Yeah, unclear what that means exactly. And creating some kind of external revenue service, separate from the IRS.
Interesting. Lots still in the works, potentially. What about the budget? That's always critical early on. How's the budget bill looking?
Described as a mess. Significant disagreement, especially over spending levels.
Standard budget fights, or worse.
Seems potentially worse. The deadline passed without a Senate vote. The House is reportedly facing major challenges getting agreement internally.
So, risk of a government shutdown.
That concern is definitely raised. A shutdown is flagged as a real possibility. The Senate seems focused on pushing for big cuts around $1.5 trillion mentioned.
And the debt limit looming in the background, too, presumably?
Always. The reports remind us of the basic mechanics there and the severe economic consequences if it's not raised. It adds another layer of pressure.
Right. One last specific item. David Perdue confirmed as ambassador to China. Why is this appointment flagged as potentially controversial?
It's mainly two things. First, his extensive past business dealings in China. That raises conflict of interest questions, representing the U.S. there now.
Okay, understandable concern.
Second, his lack of traditional diplomatic experience.
Yep.
Especially for such a critical, sensitive post like Beijing.
Compared to previous ambassadors.
Exactly. The sources describe the appointment as completely unprecedented in terms of the usual background for that role. Experienced diplomats have typically held that position.
Okay, so quite a whirlwind first 100 days. Based on this snapshot from April 30th, 2025. We've covered economics, immigration, the structure of government, rule of law issues, foreign policy shifts, public opinion.
Campaign promises, the budget, key
Yeah.
appointments. Yeah, a lot of ground covered.
And it's clear from these news reports that it's been a period marked by, well, significant action and, according to many of these sources, a real break from past norms.
Definitely a sense of disruption conveyed in the analysis. And for you, listening, it's worth remembering this is based on reports from that specific date. Things are always evolving.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought for you to ponder. Considering everything we've discussed, the sheer volume, the nature of the actions reported in just these first 100 days, what do you think is the overarching strategic vision here? Is there one coherent strategy guiding all this?
Or is it something else?
Right.
Definitely something to keep watching and thinking about.